The metal gates of the South Carolina Women's Correctional Facility creaked open, releasing Naomi Hargrove into freedom. The spring breeze hit her face, bringing with it smells she had almost forgotten during her 7 years in prison. Naomi froze for a moment, squinting against the unusually bright sun, and nervously clutched the worn bag containing her personal belongings, all that remained of her former life. The small plastic bag contained the standard assortment, a pair of tarnished earrings that Alvin had once given her, a worn wallet with no money, a cracked mirror, a slightly faded photograph of her and Jasmine laughing on the beach, the last summer before everything fell apart. While the guard was filling out the final paperwork, Naomi mechanically signed the papers, trying not to notice the indifference in the woman's eyes. To the system, she would always be a criminal. The one who stole nearly $1 million from the company she worked for. The system didn't care that she was innocent. "You're free now, Hargrove," the guard said, handing her the envelope with her release papers. "Don't come back." Naomi nodded silently and took her first steps outside the prison complex. Her legs felt like jelly. Her heart was pounding too loudly. Along the fence, she saw an inconspicuous gray sedan. Jasmine Overton was sitting behind the wheel, the only person who hadn't turned away from her all these years. Jasmine jumped out of the car, and the women hugged each other tightly. Naomi felt a lump rise in her throat, but she held back her tears. She had long ago decided that she would not cry anymore. "Let's get out of here," Jasmine said quietly, looking around. "Better not attract attention." Naomi climbed into the passenger seat. The car started, taking her away from the place where she had spent 7 years of her life. Jasmine turned on the radio, trying to fill the awkward silence, but turned it off after a minute. "Are you okay?" she asked, glancing at her friend. "I'm alive," Naomi replied, staring out the window at the passing landscape. Memories flooded back suddenly, like a dam had burst. Naomi remembered that day as clearly as if it were yesterday. It was a typical Monday morning at Excel Partners. She was working on the quarterly report when 2 men in suits entered the office. "Naomi Hargrove? We're with the financial police. We need to ask you a few questions about transactions made to Blue Spectrum Consulting." At first, she didn't even understand what they were talking about. Then she was taken to a conference room and shown documents with her signature on them, documents she had never signed. Payment orders for huge sums of money, contracts with a company she had never heard of. "This is some kind of mistake," she repeated over and over again. By evening, the mistake had turned into a nightmare. They found a program for unauthorized transfers on her computer. On her home computer, they found search queries about offshore accounts. And then they discovered an account in the Cayman Islands in her name, where some of the stolen money had been transferred. When she was brought home with a search warrant, she hoped to see support in her husband's eyes. But instead, Alvin looked at her with cold bewilderment. She remembered his words, each one etched into her memory. "Naomi, what have you done? How could you?" At that moment, she didn't understand. She only understood at the preliminary hearing when she saw Alvin whispering to the district attorney. And then she noticed Tiana Mosley in the courtroom hallway, a former dancer whom Alvin had once defended in a discrimination case. Naomi knew her. They had even had dinner together a few times. But that day in the court hallway, Tiana looked at her with barely concealed triumph. Everything became clear when Alvin refused to hire her a good lawyer, citing a conflict of interest. Instead, she was assigned an inexperienced public defender who didn't even try to challenge the obviously fabricated evidence. The trial was quick. 7 years of strict prison for large-scale financial fraud. The sentence was read out under the watchful gaze of Alvin, who sat in the front row, holding Tiana's hand. "Did you drift off again that day?" Jasmine asked gently, bringing Naomi back to the present. "Yes," Naomi rubbed her temples. "Sometimes I feel like part of me is still there, in that courtroom." Jasmine turned off the highway onto a residential street. North Charleston had changed over the years. New buildings had gone up. Old neighborhoods had been transformed. They drove through the city center to the eastern part, where Jasmine rented an apartment in a modest apartment building. "Welcome to my humble abode," Jasmine said, opening the door. "It's safe here. No one knows you'll be here." The apartment was small but cozy. Theater props and cosmetics were scattered everywhere, evidence of Jasmine's profession. "I've prepared a room for you," Jasmine said, pointing to the door on the right. "Rest, take a shower, then we'll talk." For the first time in 7 years, Naomi took a normal shower. No time limit, no guards, no dozens of other women around her. She stood under the hot water, letting it wash away the prison dust. Looking at her reflection in the steamy mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face was thin with sharp cheekbones. Her hair was short with gray streaks at the temples. And she had a scar across her left eyebrow, the result of a fight with an aggressive cellmate during her 2nd year in prison. When Naomi came out of the bathroom, Jasmine had already prepared dinner, a real home-cooked meal. "Tell me about them," Naomi asked, spearing a piece of chicken with her fork. Jasmine sighed. "They're thriving," she said, unable to hide her bitterness. "Alvin's a big shot now. He made a name for himself in a few high-profile civil rights cases. His firm is one of the 5 largest in the state. He and Tiana live in Ocean View, a new luxury complex on the coast." Naomi nodded, chewing mechanically. "And her?" "Tiana? She calls herself an activist now. She hosts a podcast about trans rights and speaks at conferences. Alvin helped her complete her transition and paid for all her surgeries. Now she's his trophy wife. The entire progressive community is thrilled about their union." Naomi put down her fork. "What about the money? The money they stole?" "No one even remembers that case. Everyone blames you. And they're a successful couple who overcame the betrayal of a loved one." Naomi stared at the abstract painting hanging on the wall. For 7 years, she had imagined this moment, the moment when she would be free and find out what had happened to those who had destroyed her life. Now that the moment had arrived, she felt a strange sense of calm. "I have a plan," she said quietly. "I've been thinking about it every day for the past 7 years." "What plan?" Jasmine leaned closer to her. "I'm going to make them pay for everything, not with money, but with the truth." Naomi told her friend about her plan. Jasmine listened, with her eyes wide open. "That's dangerous," she said when Naomi finished. "If you get caught, they won't catch me," Naomi replied firmly. "Because Naomi Hargrove no longer exists. From this moment on, I am Ruby Caldwell, a widow from Savannah." Jasmine looked at her friend for a long time, then nodded slowly. "I'll help you, but we need to change your appearance so that even your own mother wouldn't recognize you." The next day, the transformation began. Jasmine brought home professional theater supplies, wigs, contact lenses, special makeup. "First, the hair and color," she said, unfolding a brown wig with gray strands. "This will be the main one, but we'll have a couple more to change your look." Naomi tried on the wig, looking at her reflection. The hair was styled in a conservative hairstyle that instantly added 10 years to her age. "Now the eyes," Jasmine said, taking out a box of contact lenses. These changed not only the color, but also the visual shape of the eye. The dark brown lenses transformed Naomi's gaze, making it heavier. Hour after hour, Jasmine worked on Ruby Caldwell's image. She taught Naomi how to change her cheekbones with makeup and wear special inserts behind her cheeks that altered the contours of her face. She showed her how to slouch and walk differently, in small steps, limping slightly on her right leg. "You have to become Ruby completely," Jasmine said. "Not just look like her, but think like her." They compiled a detailed biography. Ruby Caldwell, 52 years old, widow husband, died of a heart attack 3 years ago. No children. Worked as a secretary at an insurance company in Savannah. After her husband's death, she sold her house and moved to North Charleston to start a new life. "You'll need to speak with an accent," Jasmine said. "A slight southern accent, but don't overdo it." Naomi practiced for hours, recording her voice and listening to the recordings. She studied the mannerisms of women older than her, the religious references a devout widow from Savannah might use. "Documents," Naomi reminded her when her physical transformation was almost complete. "I need documents in Ruby's name." Jasmine nervously bit her lip. "I have connections in the theater. A guy does props, including documents. He can help, but it will cost money." "I have a little," Naomi said, pulling an envelope out of her bag. "It's all I earned in the prison sewing workshop. Is that enough?" Jasmine counted the bills. It'll be enough to start with. I'll add mine. A week later, Naomi had a driver's license, a social security card, and even a credit card in Ruby Caldwell's name. Jasmine created a digital footprint for her, several social media accounts with a history of posts backdated to make them look real. "Now we need to get you a job," Jasmine said, "and I know just the place." It turned out that the cleaning company where Jasmine's cousin worked part-time serviced the Ocean View luxury complex, the same one where Alvin and Tiana lived. "We'll say you're a friend of the family looking for work after moving," Jasmine explained. "Darla is my cousin. She won't ask any questions." The plan worked. 2 days later, Ruby Caldwell was hired by the cleaning company and sent to work at Ocean View. "Don't worry, ma'am," said the manager, looking at the modest woman in simple clothes. "We value workers your age. You're much more reliable than young people." Naomi just smiled meekly, lowering her eyes as Ruby would have done. That same day, she entered Ocean View for the first time as a cleaner. The complex was stunningly luxurious, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and ocean views from every window. Bent over the mop, Naomi felt for the first time in 7 years that her plan for revenge was beginning to take shape. She was assigned the 3rd and 4th floors of the South Wing. Alvin and Tiana lived in the penthouse of the North Wing, but it was only a matter of time. Naomi knew that sooner or later their paths would cross. That evening, back at Jasmine's apartment, she methodically wrote down everything she had learned about the complex: the location of the cameras, the security schedule, the codes for the service rooms. "Are you sure they won't recognize you?" Jasmine asked, helping her remove her wig and wash off her makeup. "Absolutely," Naomi replied. "They only see what they want to see. An elderly cleaning lady, as inconspicuous as a piece of furniture." At the same time, at the North Charleston Police Department, Detective Solomon Renfro was finishing up some old cases. He was the kind of cop who hated leaving work for the next day. He had stumbled upon the Naomi Hargrove case file by accident while looking for precedents for another financial fraud investigation. The detective opened the folder and began reviewing the materials. Something about the case seemed strange to him. The evidence was too perfect. The testimony was too smooth. The trial was too quick. Renfro leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. In 20 years on the job, he had learned to trust his intuition, and right now, it was screaming that something was wrong with the Hargrove case. The detective made a few notes in his notebook and closed the file. Maybe tomorrow he would have time to dig deeper. In 3 weeks, Ruby Caldwell had become an integral part of life at the elite Ocean View complex. The residents didn't notice her presence, just as they didn't notice a clock ticking away as it should. She was just one of many uniformed service people, invisible, with a rag and cleaning supplies. That was exactly what she needed. Every morning, Ruby arrived at exactly 7:30, signed the logbook, and received her assignments for the day. Limping and slouching, she pushed her cleaning cart down the long corridors, methodically going about her work. No one paid any attention to the woman in uniform with the dull eyes and gray hair. Meanwhile, under Ruby's disguise, Naomi watched closely and memorized everything. She knew that Alvin left his penthouse at exactly 8:45 a.m., impeccably dressed, with a leather briefcase in his hand. His driver was already waiting downstairs to take him to his law firm in the city center. Tiana usually got up later, around 10, and often spent the first half of the day at home doing yoga or recording her podcast in a specially equipped room. Her first encounter with her ex-husband took place during her second week on the job. Naomi was washing the floor in the lobby when the elevator doors opened and Alvin stepped out, accompanied by 2 assistants. He was talking on the phone, gesturing animatedly with his free hand, and almost tripped over a bucket. "Watch where you put your things," he snapped irritably, without even looking at her. "I'm sorry, sir," Ruby muttered, lowering her head and backing away toward the wall. Alvin walked past, continuing his conversation as if nothing had happened. Naomi felt her heart sink. She had imagined this meeting for 7 years, and here he was, the man who had ruined her life, not even deigning to look at her. At that moment, she realized how perfect her disguise had been. A couple of days later, Ruby noticed on her schedule that she was assigned to clean apartment 412. It was the apartment directly below Alvin and Tiana's penthouse. The residents, An elderly couple named the Parkers had left for a month-long trip to Europe, and the manager had decided to have the apartment thoroughly cleaned. This was the chance Naomi had been waiting for. The Parkers' apartment had the same layout as the penthouse above. While cleaning it, she could study the layout of the rooms and other features that would come in handy later. But fate had an even bigger gift in store for her. In Mr. Parker's study, while dusting the bookshelves, she noticed a folder peeking out from behind an encyclopedia. Curiosity got the better of her, and Ruby carefully pulled it out and opened it. Inside were legal documents with the Alvin firm's logo. Glancing through the first page, Naomi realized that she was holding a contract for legal services between the Alvin firm and a certain Richard Parker, probably the son of the elderly owners of the apartment. Further examination of the documents revealed an interesting detail. Richard Parker was the financial director of a large construction company called Atlantic Development, and Alvin's firm represented him in a tax dispute. A folder marked "Confidential" caught her attention. In it, Naomi discovered a tax evasion scheme devised by Alvin's lawyers. The scheme involved setting up fictitious contractors and transferring funds through offshore accounts. Exactly the same tactic Alvin had used to frame her 7 years ago. Naomi's hands trembled as she photographed the documents with her modest phone. This was the first real evidence that Alvin had continued his illegal activities. That evening, when she returned to Jasmine's apartment, Naomi showed her the photos she had taken. "This is a gold mine," Jasmine whispered as she looked through the photos. "But how are you going to use this information?" "Just keeping it for now," Naomi replied, putting the puzzle together piece by piece. "But I already know that Atlantic Development is under close scrutiny by the prosecutor's office. If these documents get to the right place at the right time..." "That's dangerous," warned Jasmine. "If Alvin finds out you're digging into his business..." "He won't find out," Naomi said firmly. "To him, I'm just an elderly cleaning lady, no more noticeable than the furniture." At the same time, Detective Solomon Renfro sat at his desk at the police station, studying the case file on Naomi Hargrove. Something had been bothering him ever since he first saw that folder. "Hey, Renfro," a colleague passing by called out to him. "Working late again? Your wife is going to file for divorce soon." "I don't have a wife," Solomon replied absently, without looking up from his documents. "Exactly," his colleague laughed as he walked down the hallway. Renfro rubbed his nose and took another sip of his cold coffee. In his 20 years on the force, he had seen it all, but some cases just wouldn't let him rest. Like this one. The evidence against Naomi Hargrove looked too perfect. Computer logs, bank transfers, offshore accounts, everything pointed to her. But it was that very perfection that made him suspicious. In real life, people make mistakes, leave traces, and don't finish what they start. Here, everything was too smooth. The detective opened old news articles about the case on his computer. One of the photos showed Alvin Hargrove leaving the courthouse with a tall woman. Renowned lawyer Alvin Hargrove after the sentencing of his ex-wife Naomi, convicted of large-scale financial fraud. Also pictured is social activist Tiana Mosley. Renfro made a note to find out more about this couple. He was particularly interested in Alvin's financial situation, before and after his wife's arrest. The next day, Ruby continued her work at Ocean View. She learned from another cleaning lady that Tiana visits the spa on the first floor of the complex every Thursday. This was an opportunity not to be missed. On Thursday, after finishing her usual shift, Ruby lingered and headed toward the spa. She knew that Tiana had a massage appointment at 4 o'clock, after which she usually relaxed in the relaxation area. Naomi entered the women's changing room at the spa and changed into the uniform of a service employee, which she had hidden in her bag beforehand. Then she headed to the relaxation area, where there were usually few visitors at this time of day. Tiana was already there, reclining on a lounge chair by the pool, sipping a green smoothie and leafing through something on her tablet. 7 years hadn't changed her, except to make her even more beautiful. Her makeup was flawless, her features delicate, and her expensive swimsuit accentuated her slender figure. Looking at her, Naomi felt a pang of bitterness. This woman had helped destroy her life and was now enjoying the fruits of her betrayal. Ruby picked up the tray and began collecting used glasses and napkins from the neighboring tables. gradually approaching Tiana. When she was close enough, she deliberately knocked the table where Tiana's smoothie was standing. The glass tipped over, and green liquid spilled onto the marble floor. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, ma'am," Ruby exclaimed, rushing to wipe up the spilled drink. Tiana flinched and looked up from her tablet. "It's okay," she said after a second's pause. "Just bring me a new one." Ruby nodded and hurried to clean up the mess, mentally noting that Tiana hadn't scolded or fired her clumsy employee, as many residents of the elite complex would have done. "Are you new here?" Tiana asked, watching Ruby gather the broken glass. "I haven't seen you here before." "Yes, ma'am," Ruby replied without looking up. "This is only my 3rd week. Where are you from?" "Savannah, ma'am. I moved here after my husband died. I needed a fresh start." Ruby's voice trembled slightly. Tiana nodded with unexpected understanding. "I know what it's like to start from scratch. I was in a very different position once." "Yes, ma'am." Ruby paused, then added, "Actually, I know who you are. I saw you perform at the Moonlight in Savannah. You were magnificent." Tiana's eyes widened in surprise. Then she smiled, sincerely, without her usual social mask. "My goodness, that was so long ago. You really saw me perform?" "Yes, ma'am. My late husband and I used to go there often. You performed under the name Crystal, if I remember correctly." Moonlight was a club in Savannah where Tiana had indeed performed before meeting Alvin. Naomi knew this from conversations she had overheard back when they were still friends. "Crystal Blue," Tiana shook her head with a nostalgic smile. "I can't believe you remember. That was a different life." "You had a number with feathers and a glass cage," Ruby continued. "Stunningly beautiful." Naomi was taking a risk. She had never seen that act and had no idea if it even existed. But she knew human psychology. Everyone likes to be admired for their past achievements, especially those they consider forgotten. Her gamble paid off. Tiana's face lit up. "The bird in a cage! That was my signature act!" She shook her head. "I can't believe you remember. Not many people know about that part of my life anymore." "Talent like that is impossible to forget," Ruby smiled modestly. "Excuse me, I have to go. I'll bring you another drink." "Wait," Tiana stopped her. "What's your name?" Ruby Caldwell." "Well, Ruby, come in sometime. I'd love to talk to you about Savannah. I miss those days." Naomi barely suppressed a triumphant smile. First contact had been made, and much more successfully than she could have hoped. In the days that followed, Ruby accidentally ran into Tiana at the spa, in the lobby, in the elevator. Each time they exchanged a few words, and gradually a kind of acquaintance developed between them. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Tiana invited Ruby to her penthouse, supposedly to look at some new curtains that had been hung poorly. In reality, she just wanted to talk to someone who knew her from her past life. When she first stepped into the penthouse, Naomi felt her heart racing. She was in the enemy's lair, a luxurious apartment bought with money stolen from her. The penthouse was huge, with panoramic windows overlooking the ocean, designer furniture, and works of art on the walls. "Have a seat, Ruby," Tiana said, pointing to the sofa. "Would you like some tea?" "If it's not too much trouble, ma'am." "Please call me Tiana." They sat in the living room, drinking tea and talking about Savannah. Naomi carefully steered the conversation, allowing Tiana to reminisce about her youth while gathering information. "Is your husband from Savannah too?" Ruby asked casually. Tiana shook her head. "No, Alvin was born here in North Charleston. We met when I was having problems with the club, with discrimination. He was my lawyer." "He must be a very good lawyer," Ruby remarked. "The best." Tiana paused, and a shadow flashed across her face. At least in the courtroom. Naomi didn't miss that remark. There were clearly cracks in the couple's relationship. "And in real life?" Ruby asked cautiously. Tiana shook her head, regaining her usual smile. "Life is more complicated, isn't it?" She stood up. "More tea?" During her next visits, Naomi continued to gather information. She learned that Alvin often stayed late at work, that he and Tiana had separate bedrooms, and that Tiana suspected him of cheating. "Men in his position often think they can do whatever they want," Tiana said one day after her second glass of wine. Power and money change people, and not always for the better. You must love him very much to stay with him despite everything, Ruby remarked. Tiana let out a short laugh. Love? Maybe once. Now it's more like a mutually beneficial partnership. He helped me become who I am today. And She paused. And I keep his secrets. That phrase made Naomi prick up her ears. What secrets could Tiana be keeping? Meanwhile, Jasmine continued to build Ruby Caldwell's legend. She created social media pages for her with years of posts, found photos of her late husband, who was actually an actor from the theater where she worked, and added lots of little details that made Ruby's persona completely believable. If anyone decides to check you out, they'll find a whole life, Jasmine said, showing Naomi the profiles she had created. Look, there are even photos from your wedding. Naomi looked through the pages and nodded. Excellent work. It looks completely real. Soon, luck smiled on Naomi again. While cleaning the common area of the complex, she overheard two men in business suits discussing Alvin's latest high-profile case. Hargrove has taken on Bradley Thompson himself, said one of them. It's going to be the trial of the century. Thompson is in deep shit. If Hargrove gets him off, he'll be a legend. Naomi was familiar with the name Bradley Thompson, a major developer involved in a corruption scandal with the city authorities. According to the latest news, he was accused of bribing officials to obtain lucrative contracts. That evening, she told Jasmine about it. If Alvin took on Thompson's case, it means he's confident he'll win, Naomi said. And considering what I found in the Parkers' apartment, I suspect the victory won't be entirely fair. What do you mean? Jasmine asked. Thompson and Atlantic Development are competitors, but they use the same legal tax evasion schemes developed by Alvin's firm. Naomi thought for a moment, then smiled. It's time to start the first phase of the plan. I need to send an anonymous letter to the prosecutor's office and the Charleston Post. The information that Alvin is using the same illegal schemes for competing companies will raise a lot of questions. Jasmine helped compose anonymous letters and send them through a series of temporary email addresses that could not be traced. The letters were accompanied by photographs of documents from the Parkers' apartment, enough to pique the recipient's interest without revealing all their cards. Within a few days, the results were not long in coming. The Charleston Post published an article hinting at a conflict of interest in the activities of Alvin Hargrove's law firm. The article did not contain any direct accusations, but questions were raised. That same day, while cleaning the hall, Ruby saw Alvin coming out of the elevator. His face was contorted with anger as he shouted into his phone, "I want to know who leaked this information. Immediately! This could cost us the Thompson case." Ruby lowered her head and continued mopping the floor, hiding a smile. The first blow had been struck, and it was only the beginning. The article in the Charleston Post had the effect of a bombshell in North Charleston legal circles. Although there were no direct accusations, the hints of a conflict of interest and the questionable methods used by Alvin Hargrove's firm gave many pause. Particularly painful was the fact that the article mentioned competing construction companies, Atlantic Development and Bradley Thompson's corporation. Alvin immediately organized a press conference where he called the article baseless slander and an attempt to smear the reputation of an honest lawyer. But despite his confident tone, observant journalists noticed how he nervously fiddled with his cufflinks and avoided direct answers to specific questions. The publication was followed by a series of unpleasant events. Two major clients suspended their cooperation with Alvin's firm until the circumstances were clarified. The judge presiding over Thompson's case ordered an additional review of the evidence presented by the defense. The next day, the Charleston Post reported that the state prosecutor's office had taken an interest in the facts mentioned in the article. Ruby, continuing to work at Ocean View, watched the unfolding chaos with satisfaction. She often saw Alvin come home earlier than usual, his eyes red from exhaustion and a look of a hunted animal on his face. Twice she heard him yelling on the phone, demanding that his employees find the mole or traitor. One evening, while cleaning the common area on the top floor, Ruby witnessed an argument between Alvin and Tiana. They stood by the panoramic window, oblivious to the elderly cleaning lady, methodically wiping down the coffee tables in the far corner of the room. "I don't understand why you're so nervous," Tiana said, crossing her arms over her chest. "If everything was done correctly, as you assured me, then there's nothing to worry about." "You don't understand the seriousness of the situation," Alvin snapped. "Someone is deliberately leaking information to journalists, information that was available to a very limited circle of people." His gaze became suspicious. "By the way, you've been spending too much time with those journalists from your feminist group lately. What are you talking about?" Tiana laughed incredulously. "Are you serious? Now you suspect me? Me, who has kept all your secrets for so many years?" "I don't suspect anyone," Alvin rubbed his temple. "Just be careful what you say. Every word counts right now." "Don't tell me what to say," Tiana raised her voice. "I'm not one of your subordinates. And don't forget that if I talk, you'll be the first to suffer, not me." Alvin grabbed her wrist. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reminder." Tiana pulled her hand away. "We're connected, dear. Don't forget that." She turned and left, leaving Alvin standing by the window with a look of rage on his face. Naomi smiled to herself. The argument confirmed what she had suspected. The relationship between the couple was strained, and now, under pressure from external circumstances, it was beginning to crack. And Tiana's threat was particularly interesting. It meant she really did have something on Alvin, something that could seriously hurt him. Meanwhile, Detective Solomon Renfro continued his unofficial investigation into the case of Naomi Hargrove. After several weeks of searching, he managed to find a former IT specialist at Excel Partners who had set up the electronic payment system when Naomi was working there as chief accountant. Alex Murphy, a thin man with a nervous twitch in his left eye, agreed to meet the detective in a small cafe on the outskirts of town. He kept looking around, as if afraid he was being followed. "I don't want any trouble, detective," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "I finally have a decent job and a family. I just want to get to the bottom of a 7-year-old case," Renfro reassured him. "No trouble for you." Murphy paused, then leaned closer. "What exactly are you interested in?" "The electronic payment system you set up. Was it secure enough? Could outsiders gain access?" Murphy smiled nervously. "Secure? Officially, yes. In reality, anyone with access to the admin panel could control the system. And there were 3 people who had access: me, the chief accountant Hargrove, and—" He fell silent, looking around again. "And?" Renfro prodded him. "And the company lawyer, Alvin Hargrove, the chief accountant's husband. He insisted on having full access, supposedly for legal oversight of transactions." Renfro nodded slowly. "So, theoretically, Alvin Hargrove could create and authorize payments on behalf of his wife?" "Not theoretically, but practically." Murphy tapped his fingers nervously on the table. "What's more, a week before the incident, he asked me to install a program. He said it was for security reasons, but in fact, it was a keylogger, a program that records all keystrokes. With it, you could get all of Naomi's passwords." "And you did it?" "I was a young specialist just out of college. He was a respected company lawyer. What was I supposed to do?" The detective made a note in his notebook. "What happened after Naomi was arrested?" "I was fired. They said they were downsizing. But before that, Alvin personally made sure I deleted all the system logs for the last 3 months. For server optimization." Murphy smiled bitterly. "I always felt that something was wrong with this story. Naomi was obsessively meticulous, double-checking every number 3 times. I'll never believe she could have pulled off such a scam." Renfro closed his notebook. "Are you ready to give an official statement?" Murphy paled noticeably. I don't know. Hargrove has connections everywhere. If he finds out, the police will guarantee your safety," the detective assured him. "And believe me, it's in your best interest. It's better to tell the truth now than to get caught up in an investigation later." After a long pause, Murphy slowly nodded. "All right, I'll testify, but you have to protect me and my family." Meanwhile, Ruby continued to grow closer to Tiana. Their meetings became regular. They drank tea in the penthouse, discussed books, fashion, and the past. Naomi methodically built trust, creating the image of a simple, sincere woman who valued friendship and knew how to keep secrets. After her quarrel with Alvin, Tiana became more candid in her conversations with Ruby. "Sometimes I don't understand who this man is next to me," she confessed one day. "When we met, he was different. Passionate, caring, ready to fight for justice. And now? Power and money change people," Ruby remarked gently. "It's not just that." Tiana shook her head. "He's becoming dangerous. More and more often I notice him looking at me as if assessing what threat I pose." Naomi saw her chance. "Are you afraid of him?" Tiana paused, then nodded. "Sometimes, especially lately, he's become unpredictable." Ruby leaned closer and spoke in a quiet, confidential tone. "Tiana, I have something to tell you. I heard him talking on the phone yesterday in the garden. He was talking about you, and how you're becoming a problem that needs to be dealt with." It was a lie, but Naomi knew psychology. A seed of doubt planted in an already suspicious mind could quickly grow into full-blown fear. Tiana's eyes widened. "What exactly did he say?" "I don't want to scare you," Ruby pretended to hesitate. "Maybe I misunderstood." "Ruby, please. I need to know." He said something like, "She knows too much. If she decides to use it against me, we both know what needs to be done." I didn't hear what his companion said, but Alvin then added, "I have experience dealing with these kinds of problems." Tiana paled. Ruby could see that her words had hit home. "Do you think he's planning something against me?" "I don't know." Ruby shook her head sympathetically. "But if you're really afraid, maybe you should get yourself some protection. Information that would make it disadvantageous for him to harm you." Tiana thought about it. "I have something," she finally said. "Documents, recordings of conversations, evidence of some questionable actions on Alvin's part. I've been keeping them as insurance, but if he's really up to something, maybe you should talk to someone who can help," Ruby suggested. "Someone who knows about these things." "Who? The police?" Tiana laughed nervously. "Half the department is in Alvin's pocket." "Not necessarily the police." Ruby hesitated. "There's one person, a journalist. He investigates cases like yours, completely confidential. If you want, I can set up a meeting." Tiana hesitated. Naomi could see the struggle on her face, fear of Alvin versus fear of exposing her own role in his schemes. "I don't want to give anyone an interview," Tiana finally said. "It's not an interview," Ruby reassured her. "Just a conversation. You can just listen to what he has to say and decide whether you trust him or not. No strings attached." After a long pause, Tiana nodded. "Okay, but just a conversation, and somewhere safe." "Of course," Ruby smiled. "Leave it to me." That evening, Naomi told Jasmine about her plan. "You're going to pretend to be a journalist?" her friend asked incredulously. "No," Naomi shook her head. "I'm going to reveal part of my identity. Show her who I really am and offer her a deal. Her testimony against Alvin in exchange for immunity from prosecution." "That's risky," Jasmine warned. "What if she runs straight to Alvin?" "She won't," Naomi said confidently. "She's afraid of him. And she's smart enough to know that a deal is better than prison." The meeting was set for a small motel on the outskirts of town, an inconspicuous place where no one asked questions. Tiana arrived in a taxi, nervously looking around. Ruby was already waiting for her in the room. "Come in," she said, opening the door. "He'll be here soon." Tiana entered, looking around the modest room suspiciously. "Not the best place for a meeting." "It's safe," Ruby replied. "No one will know you were here." She offered Tiana a seat and poured her some water from a pitcher. Then she sat down opposite her and looked intently into her eyes. "Actually, there won't be a reporter," Ruby said calmly. "I wanted to talk to you in private." Tiana frowned. "I don't understand. Why all the drama?" "Because we need to discuss something important, something that happened 7 years ago." Ruby slowly removed her glasses, then her wig, revealing short dark hair. She straightened up, changing her posture, and spoke in her real voice, accent-free, younger and firmer. "Do you recognize me, Tiana?" Tiana recoiled in horror, knocking over her glass of water. "Naomi! But that's impossible! You should be in prison!" "I served my time," Naomi replied calmly. 7 years for a crime I didn't commit, for a crime you and Alvin committed. Tiana tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't obey her. I don't know what you're talking about. Come on, Tiana. We both know the truth. You and Alvin stole money from Excel partners and framed me. You used my logins, installed a keylogger on my computer, and created fake documents in my name. That's crazy, Tiana laughed nervously. I'm leaving. Sure, go ahead, Naomi shrugged. Just keep in mind that Detective Renfro has copies of all the documents I've collected over the past few weeks. He's reopened my case. And by the way, he found Alex Murphy, the IT guy who installed the keylogger at Alvin's request and then deleted all the system logs. This was only partially true. Naomi didn't know exactly what the detective had discovered, but the bluff worked. Tiana froze, not reaching the door. What do you want? She asked quietly. The truth, Naomi replied. And justice. I want you to testify against Alvin. Tell him how it really was. And go to prison instead of you? Tiana smiled bitterly. No, thank you. You don't have to, Naomi shook her head. I've already spoken to the prosecutor. If you agree to cooperate, they may offer you a deal, a significantly reduced sentence or even probation in exchange for testifying against Alvin. That was also a bluff. Naomi hadn't spoken to any prosecutor, but she knew how the system worked and was confident that such a deal was entirely possible. Why should I believe you? Tiana asked. Because you have no choice. As you said yourself, Alvin is becoming dangerous. He already suspects that someone is leaking information. How long do you think it will take him to figure out that it might be you? And what will he do then? Naomi saw the fear return to Tiana's eyes. I have proof of his latest schemes, she continued, with Atlantic Development and the Thompson case. But I need your testimony about what happened 7 years ago. That's the only way I can clear my name completely. Tiana was silent, thinking things over. Naomi knew that a complex calculation was going through her head, assessing risks, looking for a way out, weighing options. I want immunity, Tiana finally said. Complete immunity from prosecution. That's up to the prosecutor, not me, Naomi replied. But I think with compelling evidence against Alvin, the chances are very high. Another pause, then Tiana slowly nodded. Okay, I'll testify, but first I want guarantees. Tomorrow, Naomi said. Tomorrow I'll bring Detective Renfro. He'll take your preliminary statement and we can discuss the details of the deal. The next day, when Tiana returned to the motel, Naomi, now without makeup and a wig, and Detective Renfro were waiting for her. Tiana told the whole story, how Alvin had come up with the plan to steal the money, how they had set up a fake company, how they had framed Naomi using her bank details. I'm not proud of it, she said quietly, but at the time, it seemed like the only way to start a new life. Alvin promised she'd get no more than 3 years. I didn't know it would be 7. Renfro wrote down her statement and promised to contact the prosecutor about a possible deal. Now we need to act quickly, he said. Tomorrow we're meeting at Alvin's office. Tiana, you'll make an appointment with him under the pretext of discussing an important matter. Naomi and I will wait in the car and follow you in. The plan was simple. Tiana would start the conversation by hinting that she knew about the new investigations against Alvin. Then, when he started threatening her, Renfro and Naomi would walk in. Tiana would turn on the recorder and they would get Alvin's confession. The next morning, they met outside Alvin's office. Tiana looked pale and frightened but determined. Are you ready? Naomi asked. Tiana nodded. It's time to end this nightmare. She entered the building. Naomi and Renfro waited 5 minutes, then followed her. When they reached the right floor, they heard shouting coming from Alvin's office. Are you out of your mind? Alvin yelled. Do you realize you'll end up behind bars if you start talking? I won't, Tiana replied calmly. I have a deal. What deal? At that moment, the door opened and Naomi and Detective Renfro entered the office. Alvin froze when he saw his ex-wife. His face turned white, as if he had seen a ghost. Naomi? Hello, Alvin, she said calmly. It's been a long time. What's going on here? Alvin looked at Renfro. Who are you? Detective Solomon Renfro, North Charleston Police Department. Renfro introduced himself, showing his badge. We have some questions about a financial fraud case involving Excel Partners that happened 7 years ago. That case is closed, Alvin snapped. The criminal was convicted. I'm afraid not, Renfro replied. We have new evidence indicating that you and Miss Mosley were the real culprits. Alvin laughed, but it sounded false. That's absurd. You have no evidence. We have Alex Murphy's testimony about how you asked him to install a keylogger on your wife's computer and then delete all the system logs, Renfro said calmly. And now we have a confession from your accomplice. He nodded to Tiana, who took a voice recorder out of her purse and turned it on. I told you everything, Alvin, she said quietly. Everything, from beginning to end. How we created Blue Spectrum, how we used Naomi's logins, how we fabricated evidence against her. You? Alvin choked with rage. You betrayed me? I just chose the lesser of two evils, Tiana replied. Just like you once chose to sacrifice Naomi for money. Alvin lunged at her, but Renfro caught him. One more move and I'll add assault to the list of charges, the detective warned. You won't prove anything, Alvin hissed. I have the best lawyers in town, who are unlikely to risk their reputations for a colleague involved in fraud, Naomi remarked. Especially when there's irrefutable evidence. She moved closer to her ex-husband. 7 years, Alvin. You stole 7 years of my life. And for what? For money? For her? She nodded toward Tiana. Was it worth it? Alvin didn't answer, but Naomi saw what she had been looking for all these years in his eyes. Guilt. For a moment, the mask of the confident lawyer slipped, and she saw a frightened man who realized his game was over. Alvin Hargrove, you are under arrest on charges of financial fraud, document forgery, and obstruction of justice, Renfro said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. 3 months later, Naomi sat in the courtroom listening to the judge read the sentence. Alvin Hargrove was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Tiana Mosley, in accordance with her cooperation agreement with the investigation, received a 3-year suspended sentence and 500 hours of community service. Naomi was completely exonerated. The court issued an official apology and awarded her compensation for her wrongful imprisonment. But no amount of money could bring back the years she had lost. After the hearing, Naomi left the courthouse. Jasmine was waiting for her on the steps. How are you feeling? Her friend asked. Naomi took a deep breath of the fresh spring air. Free, she replied. Finally, truly free. They walked slowly down the street, leaving behind the courthouse and everything it symbolized. Injustice, pain, years of imprisonment. Ahead of her lay a new life that Naomi could build as she chose, unburdened by the shadow of past accusations. You know, she said, looking up at the bright blue sky, sometimes justice does prevail. It just takes time and a little help.